Alright, now that all of the weapons have been released for Splatoon 3, barring any potential third kits, which I personally don't believe there will be, but even if there are, I can do this later. But now that all of the weapons are out, and most of the major balance changes are probably out too, I'd like to go ahead and talk about the weapons. Number one, I am not good at this game. I am not an expert. My opinion does not hold any weight, but I thought I would just go over these anyways. So for the first based weapons in the game, there's 55 if we're including these scoped weapons. So I'll do about 18 per part, and we'll have 3 parts of it. And then after that, we'll go ahead and do the seasons per season. And the first 18 here will cover all of the base shooters, the base rollers, and then the Squiffer. So we'll just go ahead and get into it with the Splash-o-matic. This is a very short-ranged weapon. It is a Slayer, coming with Curling Bomb and Ultra Stamp. This is a decent kit, at least in my opinion. If I had any power over it and we had to have the second kit the way it was with beacons and well, I think Stamp could have been swapped out for something a little bit better. This is what they got on the Splash-o-matic 7 kit. It's better than Splashdown in Splatoon 2. I don't know about Splatoon 3. I haven't used Splashdown very much in this game. Splashdown wasn't even in the game, even whenever this was added anyway, so that's kind of a moot point. It would have probably preferred something. I mean, Zuka would have been really nice on it, but maybe a little strong since it can get its special pretty decently. And Curling Bomb could have maybe been swapped out for something else too, like maybe a Splat Bomb or something, but Curling and Sploosh do have some good synergy together. It is just a shame that the second kit is just the way it is, and it makes this kit, while good and better than the second kit, still feel a little lacking if this is the ultimate kit that it gets. The main weapon itself has not great RNG. If you're hugging people, it is good at killing, but that's the biggest issue with this kit and the second kit. Getting close enough to do that takes a lot of effort. Now, some maps you can, some maps you can't. That's more map design on this game's part. Since it's only a 3-shot kill and you have a pretty good fire rate, it's not too hard to land that. But if you have been shooting for a while, it is a little hard to actually land those shots, especially if you are in close quarters combat with not a lot of paint around you. This weapon really likes to have other people painting for it. It also has some like unique, I don't know how to say it, acceleration, where after going and main strafing, you'll get a lot faster into the ground than other weapons, which makes it really nice to actually splatter dash. I believe that's what they call it, where you're constantly shooting to paint for yourself and then immediately going back in your ink and doing that over and over to either get away or try to close some distance. This thing is not good at all at fighting at its maximum range. It's not an effective range, it's maximum range. Again, the RNG really kills it there. So your best bet is literally hugging people, like I said before. Overall, again, a decent kit. It could be better. And since this is the ultimate kit that we've got, again, it does leave a little to be desired, but it does work. Stamp is aggressive. It helps the main weapon when it does struggle to get in places. It's not perfect. You can still be shot by shooters or other things, but you can throw it if you absolutely need to have some range. And Curling, again, works well with it for mobility and just as something you can throw into the fray if you really need it to do something at range that you can't really reach. Under our next weapon, the Splattershot Jr., it comes with Splat Bomb and Big Bubbler. I'm not sure how compared to the Zap this is. In Splatoon 2, it came with Splat Bomb and Ink Armor. Ink Armor is an amazing special weapon, but Zap got Suction Bomb and Ink Armor, making it kind of just completely outclassed here. In this game, it is completely different from the Zap, having Splat Bomb and Big Bubbler instead of Splat Bomb and Cooler or something like that. I don't really know what people think about this game. In my opinion, it just feels a little not aggressive enough. Yes, it's not supposed to be aggressive, it's supposed to be supportive, but the way it does that, and a lot of people do it this way, is it spams bombs. It has that 10% bigger ink tank, which does help ink efficiency wise, but a lot of people play into that by stacking Subsaver and throwing a lot of bombs. In my experience, this really is only annoying and not particularly good. If you're having a bad day, it just makes it worse and causes you to get tilted, and that's what's actually good about it, not the actual effectiveness of the bombs. Personally, I like to just throw on maybe a bit of Subsaver and then use my main weapon to fight, you know, try to get some paint down for teammates or something like that and be a little more mobile. Of course, Splat Bombs are good for it, and just throwing the one can still be annoying. And that's kind of what it has to do. You can't reach very far. Your accuracy is not good. Even if your fire rate is decent, You're still a 4-shot kill, which, you know, it's very hard to do that whenever you don't have great accuracy, and your range isn't very good either. This is why many people considered Zap to paint better than Splattershot Jr. Even if Jr. paints better up close, Zap can paint a little further away, a little bit safer. There's not much of a difference there, but in the heat of battle, you will start to feel that, especially since you can affect people with damage with the Zap a little bit easier than the Splattershot Jr. You can, of course, hug people to get some fast kill times, but that is still not reliable, and you still have to land 4 shots instead of 3 the Splash-o-matic have to land. I believe the hitbox on the Junior shots is also smaller than the Splooshes, so you're struggling with that too. Now with that paint and the Splat Bomb, you are getting your bubbler quite often, but you're not able to use it too much. This is one of those specials where you set it up and there's a timer on it. And unlike something like Ink Armor, where it is a global special and you can help your teammates no matter where you're at, sitting safely or in the fight, you now have to strategically place this, which would be fine if a lot of the specials in the game and even some weapons didn't just completely shred this thing. Now, yes, you don't want it to be too strong to be an HP sponge, because that can be worse, and a lot of people like to use this as an ink refill to throw little mini splat bomb rushes, throwing 2, refilling their ink tank with their special, and then throwing 2 more. But other than that, it's just okay. The Junior is made for defense. That is what it's always been. It's either had Ink Armor, Bubbler, or Big Bubbler. Those are just defensive specials, and that's what they want this weapon to be. Throw your bombs, get your special, use that to defend, and then go from there. And while this can be effective sometimes you just find yourself rather having a more aggressive weapon that can actually fight in things and still has a lethal bomb, like N-ZAP. Again, the only real thing this has over N-ZAP is the bubbler, which can be okay in modes like Tower Control or even Rainmaker guarding the pedestal, but if you got more than 2 people shooting at that thing, it's gonna go down pretty quickly. And unlike something like Splat Roller, which we'll talk about in a bit, it doesn't have the best tools to defend itself in a bubble. Sure, you can roll a bomb at your feet, but once that's done, you'll either have to throw another one to completely waste your entire ink tank, or refill to throw another one, or just use your main weapon, which isn't the most reliable, especially at that range. Roller is stronger because it can swat people who get in your bubbler range, or it can do vertical flicks outside of the bubbler, and it can also hang very close to the edge of the bubble and do things there. This is not something Splattershot Jr. can do. It's an okay thing, and I do like Jr. I like how it plays. It's a very fast weapon, and it's not made for damage, it's made for paint. That can be fun, but there are some weapons that just do this better than Jr., and while it is okay at the job it's supposed to be doing, it's just not too terribly great in my opinion and in my playing of it. Next up, we have the Splash-o-matic. This was the best weapon in the game for quite a while, and for good reason, having Burst Bomb and Crab Tank. Amazing synergy with this weapon. Splash is perfect accuracy on land or in the air, is a 4-shot kill at doing 28 damage I believe, and paints very good. It's not as good as something like the Splattershot Jr., but I would hope it wouldn't be, because then Jr. has absolutely no advantage over anything else. Burst bombs work amazing with this weapon combo wise. An outside hit means you only need 3 shots to kill, and an inside hit at the 60 damage mark means you only have to do 2 shots to kill. It's great if you're not perfectly on point, you can still take that 1 less shot, and if you're really good at it, you can trap them in their own ink and only deal 2 shots to take them out. Again, just amazing. It also helps you paint and move around, which is great for Splash because it is already a mobile weapon, so giving it something else for mobility is amazing. And it's also good for poking at long ranges. Again, if you can hit that 60 damage, that's great, but even if not, 35 damage is some nice softening damage for your longer ranged friends. This gets even better when you have Crab. This allows you to pretty much just shred the entire field, anyone who gets in your line of sight, as long as you're good enough with it. You can also tank with it in ball form, which is also great to just get out of any sketchy situations that you're not really sure you want to actually attack with the Crab in. And then you have little mini explosion shots that, while not the best for damage, can allow you to do some decent stuff, finishing off people that go behind walls, or even paint a little bit. Again, there's not much else to say about this. It's just a really great kit, something I always love to pick up if I am in the mood for it. And even if not, it still just works very well. Next up, we have the Aerospray with Fizzy Bomb and Reef Slider. This is made to pet out a lot of paint. Aerospray is kind of similar to Splattershot Jr., except now it takes 5 shots to kill, and it has, I believe, about the same accuracy. It just does shoot a lot faster. That being said, with that accuracy at a splatter shot or about Splattershot's range, I think it's a little bit shorter. It does struggle to hit a lot of anything, and now it takes 5 shots to kill, so you're not really slaying with this very often. This thing is made to paint, and that's what it does well. Fizzy Bomb does help poke at longer distances or makes trails for your teammates or anything like that, and it's also pretty good for you to just, you know, annoy people a lot with. This is another one of those bomb spam weapons where people like to stack a bunch of sub-saver and throw 2 out. Only downside of this is that the special you're painting for is not terribly great. Reef Slider is really only notable for actually painting splat zones very easily and being annoying that way, and other than that, it's just kind of an aggressive thing that you get killed out of a lot of times unless you're using it to get away and behind walls or something like that, but then it kind of feels like a waste. Would be interesting to see if this got a more aggressive special that wasn't on the gold kit. You know, Booyah Bomb's fine, but then you lose your burst bomb that you got in Splatoon 2 with it. So a little unfortunate and just a little really lackluster kit. It can't do much other than paint and be annoying with fizzy bombs. And, you know, it is a zones weapon. That is what it seems to be made for perfectly. It paints for its special, uses its special, tries to get out. If it gets out, great. If it doesn't, it just respawns in and starts throwing fizzy bombs to get mid-range people off of your bag. That's what it does. I don't like it. I've never really liked the Aerosprays too much. It's fun, similar to Splattershot Jr, to paint a bunch and be quick on your feet and stuff like that. But whenever it comes down to it, you're not winning many fights unless you're hugging them again or anything like that. So I'm just not a terribly big fan of it. Now we're getting on to the Splattershot. The regular one was Suction Bomb and Try Zuka. This is an amazing weapon. Zuka is known for being incredibly cheap sometimes, and it is. If you know how to angle those shots, you'll just be getting free kills a lot of the time, which feels cheap, and it feels cheap to be killed by them, but that's what it is, and they haven't nerfed it yet, so it seems to be at the point where they want it to be. Splattershot itself is a very, very, very good main weapon. While not as fast or as good at painting as something like Zap, it still has that 3-shot kill and not terrible accuracy. It's not as good, I believe, as something like N-ZAP, but since you only have to land 3 shots, it doesn't feel as bad as long as you're not just constantly painting and then immediately going into a fight with worse RNG. The decent range it has also helps it a lot. It can either play support and paint for Zuka whenever it's kind of locked out, or it can be aggressive and full-on Slayer, being able to use that Zuka if it does randomly get it, if you are playing into a more quick respawn playstyle. Suction bombs are always great. Lethal bombs are just never something I think a weapon would complain about. Maybe a Splatling, but I think they even like to have a lethal bomb too. It's just always nice to be able to throw something and get immediate pressure from it, force them off of the tower, or anything like that. It helps paint too whenever you can't get too close to something like a Hydra or a E-liter or anything like that too. Again, just really great kit. Maybe not as amazing as the Splash kit, but it does its own thing, and it's really just stuck around to being one of the best weapons throughout the entire game's life, due to it just being a great all-around weapon, being able to do many things on many maps very well. I personally really enjoy this weapon. It's just a lot of fun. Next up, we have the .52 Gal, coming with Splash Wall and Killer Well 5.1. Little bit weaker than its Splatoon 2 variant, coming with the Booyah Bomb instead, but it's still great. 52 is always going to be a good weapon too, especially in solo play where you can kind of sneak around a little bit more without being detected. 2 shots to kill with this weapon, and again, not great RNG on it, but the 2 shots definitely help it out a lot in regards to that. So again, as long as you're not painting and then immediately going into fighting, you should be fine to get those 2 shots pretty consistently. Your shot fire rate is a little bit slower, but this weapon paints a lot per bullet. I believe, and I'm going off memory here, but usually it'll paint for 3 splotches per bullet, and then I think I want to say every second shot it'll do 4 splotches per bullet. That's pretty good. That's double of what the Splattershot Jr has, since Jr only paints 2 splotches per bullet and maybe a third one around your feet. That slower fire rate won't help you paint as much, but again, the paint that it can put out while not being contested is pretty good. Splash Wall helps it a lot getting in and just planting itself in, being very strong, especially since it's shorter range, so it helps you fight more mid-ranged options. As long as you're watching your back and making sure no one's getting behind you to throw a bomb or something like that. Bit ink hungry, but that's how all wall weapons are. You'll have to plan around that correctly. And then, well, while not being the best, can help combo a tiny bit. Obviously, it's not doing the whole of the 48 damage that you need to get a kill with it, but it'll certainly help them have to focus a little more on dodging your well instead of fighting you. That's kind of the purpose of it, distracting. Can help with getting people off tower too. It's not terribly great at that though, because I can just jump off and get back on and kind of play footsie with it. But you do get this very often, so it feels okay with it. It helps you pressure the backlines too if you absolutely need to for a couple of seconds. I like the difference this has the splatter shot, where it's not exactly the same. Since you don't have a lethal bomb, you'll have to get in and do some of the work yourself with your main weapon. But your sub weapon does help you do that a lot, and well, while could be better, it is not bad at all for the weapon. Again, could be a lot better, obviously, getting crab or something like that, but it's not something like Reef Slider where now you're out of luck and you have to hope you don't die after your Reef Slider ends. Next up, the N-ZAP. I used to use this a lot in Splatoon 2 with ink armor. I loved ink armor. It's a very annoying thing now that I realize what it actually does. It's you know, a global special that gives you armor that can pretty much eat at least one shot from any weapon. In this game, it gets cooler instead. Keeps the suction bomb though. Main weapon itself is pretty much a bit longer range Splattershot Jr, like I said before. It's a 4-shot, but its accuracy is much better. I believe the fire rate is a little bit slower, but that's fine because you are now much more accurate than the Junior is, especially at those longer ranges. It also does 30 damage after a buff, which makes it better for DPS against something like the Rainmaker shield, making it just a very solid weapon. While not as jack of all trades, I don't think, as the Splattershot, it's very popular for its Tacticooler. Tacticooler is great. It is the ink armor of this game, but instead of being global, you have to throw it at one point and everyone has to run to that point. So a bit easier to counter that way, but it's still a very dominating special. You see a lot of this and it can be very hard to fight in solo play. That's where I play. I don't actually play any competitive or anything like that, but in solo play, this is a very hard thing to counter, especially if you get 2 weapons with cooler on one team. Then it's just a constant barrage of enemies running at you. And you want weapons that can paint pretty well for it. Zap does this well. It's a good painter. Like I said, Splattershot Jr, but longer range, a little bit less paint, but you can paint farther, safer, and not have to worry as much about the Junior's issues. Suction Bomb, and fun fact, Suction Bombs are actually the same cost as Splat Bombs. I used to think they were more expensive because their burst radius was a little bit larger, but nope, they're the same. It works well with the weapon. Same thing with the Splattershot. You know, you can poke longer ranged enemies with it. It's lethal, so that's always great. Force people off tower, anything like that. And it also helps you paint for your cooler. And you want to be getting these as much as possible. That way you can actually support your aggressive teammates and even your backlines in case they do get picked off for whatever reason. I don't really think you can go wrong with this weapon. It works well on a lot of maps. Maybe not as many as Splattershot, but again, having cooler automatically gives a weapon something to do, whether it be painting for your teammates or just using it to be aggressive yourself. It's very, very, very flexible, and I absolutely adore this weapon. Next up, we have the Splattershot Pro. Love the look of this weapon, and I used to use the Pro a lot in Splatoon 2, along with its Forge variant, and of course the Kinsa variant, which is always great. This one comes, instead of a point sensor, with Angle Shooter. They gave it a lot of buffs, so it's kind of a worse burst bomb, where yes, it can deal 45 damage, and yes, it's cheaper than a burst bomb. It's still a little hard to hit. Since the reticle for the Angle Shooter is not the same as the Splattershot Pro, you can find yourself missing a lot, and I don't have a lot of practice with the sub-weapon, I'll be honest. It is just something I've never really found much interest in figuring out, but it does work for what it's supposed to do. Splattershot Pro can combo well with it at range. If someone tries to run away after you hit 2 shots, you just tag them and they're out. Or you can throw 2 and then try to land 1 shot to actually get a kill. I believe that's a combo that works. It's okay. And again, the movement options for it are pretty nice, and it can mark people if you so desire. It helps, but again, I've never really been great with this thing, and I've never really had much of an affinity for it. Next up, we have Crab Tank. Of course, every weapon loves this. No weapon's going to be afraid to have it. Splattershot Pro struggles to paint for it a little bit. Yes, the weapon itself is mid-range, so it can paint a little further away, but the issue is that it's a bit slower. It's a 3-shot kill, like the regular Splattershot, and it is very accurate. Not perfect like the Splash, but very, very, very accurate. And with a little bit of Intensify, it's very good in the air too. But It is ink hungry, and it does not have the fastest fire rate in the world, meaning you won't be getting too many crabs, especially if you're focusing on painting, because then you're not really putting the weapon into its aggressive standpoint that I believe it does want to play. It's kind of trying to be that midline jack of all trades that Splattershot wants to do for short range weapons, but it doesn't do it particularly well because the mid-range weapons are more specialized into what they want to do. So when you try to condense those down into one weapon, it just kind of becomes mediocre instead of Splattershot's amazing. The crab does, again, help it out though. It helps it with longer range targets that can't really be hit by the angle shooter as easily. And, you know, like I've said with the Splash-o-matic, it just helps with painting a little bit if you need it to, or tanking some damage if you absolutely want to. Not a bad weapon by any means, but I do like the Pro kit a little bit better, coming with Suction Bomb and Booyah Bomb. But again, you can't really go wrong with it. It's not terrible like some weapons. Next up, the 96 Gal, definitely one of my favorite main weapons in the game. Sprinkler and Ink-Vac come with this one. It is a bit longer range than the Splattershot Pro. I believe a little bit shorter range than the Squelcher and the Squeezer. This thing is not great RNG wise. It's continuing the 52 gal. It would seem a little bit better accuracy wise, but since you are shooting further away, it's gonna sting a little bit more at those further ranges. Fire rate is very slow too, but similar to the 52 gal, it does paint a lot per shot instead of actually putting out a lot of bullets. This weapon is supposed to play it slow, try to get some picks off, and then it farms for its vac pretty nicely, so it's good for something like tower control or even clan blitz. That's where I really like to use this thing because it does have a lot of results whenever I use it there. Sprinkler is okay. It'll help you meat shield maybe occasionally. That's how I like to use it, or use it like a little mini burst bomb that you can get away with, or just, you know, move around a little bit if you're not having to constantly fight. And it can paint a little bit if you do throw it far away. It's just not terribly amazing. It does help the main weapons paint a little bit though. And since you are painting for a vac, I don't know if a sprinkler is the best thing in the world. It's not. You could do a lot better for a sub weapon with 96 cal. You know, burst bombs. That would be really good, trapping people and making shots easier to land. And while yes, the accuracy is a pretty not great thing, if you again don't paint immediately before fighting, you should be fine to at the very least land some shots. Just try to treat your weapon as chip damage. Back in Splatoon 2, you could get the damage all the way up to 70 with main power up, and I believe you could do that too in Splatoon 1 with damage up. And this comboed with a lot. Well, it wouldn't combo with anything that did less than 30 damage. Anything that did more was free game for you to just one tap and be done with them. That felt great. Here, it's not as good. It deals 62 damage, which is okay. Combos with some things, but not too much. The closer you get to 50, the less you'll combo with. With that being said, it's still a great weapon. I love to use it, but I do like the second kit a bit better. I hope that doesn't become too much of a recurring trend, but I do like using the second kit a bit better, but this one's not terrible. We did have to lose ink armor for it, which, you know, that was probably my favorite weapon in Splatoon 2 alongside Zap, just because it had ink armor, and it painted for it pretty safely and decently. Again, this thing has long enough range where you can paint safely, so at the very least you'll be getting a decent amount of vacuums to help that way. And again, I just really love this weapon too. Next we have Jet Squelcher with Angle Shooter and Ink-Vac once again. I'm not terribly great with Jet Squelcher. I've never been. I've wanted to be. I've tried to, you know, learn how to use the weapon correctly, but it's your backline shooter. It's very far ranged, has decent accuracy. I wouldn't say quite as good as the Splattershot Pro since you are fighting people at your longer range, which makes your accuracy worse, even if it doesn't look that bad. It is a 4-shot kill, but you'll do 96 damage with 3 shots, making you combo with a lot of stuff if you are in firefights with your team. Fire rate, I believe, is exactly the same as the Splattershot Pro, so that's also decent. You know, it's fairly mobile for what's supposed to be a backline. You can also midline with it a little bit. I am absolutely terrible at doing that though, so I tend to just kind of try to paint for vac and support pushes that way. It's not terribly ink hungry either for being a backline and having, you know, similar stats to the Splattershot Pro, so that's not terrible either. Unfortunately, didn't get a great kit on this first time around. Having the angle shooter from the Splattershot Pro and the Ink-Vac from the .96 scale kind of feels like a combination of the two, having the little bit more range from the 96 scale, but the fire rate and accuracy of the Splattershot Pro. And you can see that with the kit here. Angle shooter's okay with it. You can combo at range with it if you do get used to the little reticle changes from the angle shooter. and I don't think it's terrible. It helps you kind of poke backlines with it. If you get enough sub-saver to throw 3 of them, that does threaten a kill on a lot of the longer range threats that you can't necessarily reach, but I don't think it's the best thing to actually, you know, go for that. I feel like you're losing out on a lot of gear perks by doing that. It is a thing you can do, it's just not amazing. The paint that it does put out is pretty nice with the jet squelcher, I will not lie. That, you know, the little burst bomb effect that it does get is pretty good, and it is also nice to be able to tripwire people and mark them, especially since longer range weapons like that way to keep tabs on people. It's not as effective as a point sensor though, because it's not as wide range. N-ZAP is similar to the 96 scale on this front, where you can either use it to defend from specials or something like that, and it can also help to defend pushes as you're trying to push forward with your team. Very similar usage here to the 96 scale on that front. It can get a lot of paint since it does paint pretty well. It's very similar to 96 scale on that front too, except for the fact that it does paint a little bit further. I just believe it paints less large splotches when it does paint. So while it does do like 4, I think, splotches per shot, it's not going to be as large as the 96 scale splotches. So you'll be painting a little bit less closer together, but you will be able to paint a slightly further than the 96 scale, making it a bit safer to paint too. Doesn't contest very well, and the aggression is not good at all. Having a 4 shot with that slow of a fire rate is going to be rough. But if you know how to trap people with things and, you know, use your teammates as meat shields or something like that, or just kind of pick off distracted enemies, it's a pretty good weapon. It does again struggle on its own, and if everyone's dead, you don't have much you can do. The most you can do is maybe vac and guard some jump points, but in solo play, that really won't happen that often. They won't jump to you if you're the only one alive. They'll expect you to probably go down. And since the only thing you really do have is vac, you can cheese zones with it. That is a thing that it's used for, and that's something I neglected to mention on 96 scale too. You can do a lot of paint with it in zones, and it can be somewhat aggressive if you place it right. You know, it can be a little area denial too, and that's what this weapon really is. Lots of area denial, but it's not perfect, and I think it would just rather have something where it could defend from a push, and it's the only thing alive. Either that or something to throw out and act independent of the weapon itself. Next up, we're on to the semi-automatics. L3 Nozzlenose, coming with Curling Bomb and Crab. If you've watched the 3 wins with this weapon, I said this weapon got a little robbed with its kit, and I still think that. It's been like a couple of hours since I recorded that. I don't know why if we share kits, we had to share the worst kits, because this would have been a perfectly fine kit to share. I understand why they didn't do it, because these are both base weapons, but this thing would have loved Burst Bomb and Crab, or even Burst Bomb and something else besides Stamp that it got in the second kit. This kit isn't terrible, it does do something, it is mobile, it can farm Crab pretty easily, the weapon itself does paint pretty well. I just have some issues with it myself. It's very hard to hit shots with it because it's not like a shooter where you can constantly just spray bullets on command. You have to get those 3 out before you can do anything else with it other than move. So a lot of times I kind of just don't track with it, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to track your targets after you tap that button. Since the bullets come out very quickly, it's easy to just kind of miss that. And compared to the H3, it just does struggle a little bit for myself to actually hit things. Jump accuracy isn't perfect, but its land accuracy is perfect. So that's pretty nice if you are walking. And the natural run speed of the weapon's pretty good too. If you did watch that 3 wins, I only had 1 sub of run speed, and you can see, you know, I was scooting around pretty quickly all over the place. Curling Bomb does help it get out, however, as since you are locked into those 3 shots and it does paint pretty decently, sometimes you don't really have to get those out and then have to do it again to get a little further away. The weapon does paint well, again, but it is locked into those 3 shots each time, so you want to make sure you're planning that out and in a safe position to, you know, just kind of throw down some paint or something like that. This is a great zones weapon. Also, I think good for Rainmaker because the DPS is pretty fine too. It is a 4 shot, by the way, so you're landing your 3 bullets means you won't get a kill and you'll have to land at least 1 from the next volley to get a kill. A lot of times I'll hit 2 bullets, maybe sometimes, and then even if I hit 2 bullets from the volleys of the next one, they might have been healed already, and then I have to land even more. It's a very difficult weapon to learn in a firefight, and especially while firefighting, but if you do know how to use this, it's a force to be reckoned with and can be very difficult to actually, you know, pin down. Next up, we have the H3 Nozzlenose, coming with point sensor and cooler. This thing paints pretty well. I believe the exact same range as the Splattershot Pro, maybe a little bit more, but it's a semi-automatic version. This is a 3-shot weapon though, and I tend to be liking this weapon more than the L3. As much as I really want to like the L3, the H3 just does feel better. You only have to land 3 of the shots, and even landing 2 of them does such massive damage that you might combo before you even have to land the 3rd shot. And even if you don't, you get that satisfying little direct sound that you would get from like a charger or something. It's a little bit different though whenever you do land all 3 hits, making it very satisfying to actually hit 3 shots. Point sensor's okay for it. Since you do have to deal with the 3 volley shots before pausing for a bit, I think point sensor does help pinpoint your enemies and find them before you actually start engaging them. That is helpful, and it's also helpful for your teams. This is 100% a support weapon, much like it was in Splatoon 2 with the H3D kit, and I guess the regular H3 too. It had point sensor and Tenta missiles. The H3D had suction bomb and ink armor, sharing the kit with N-ZAP. Those are very good support weapons in Splatoon 2, getting massive amounts of missiles and ink armors too, just because of how far you can paint and how decently it does paint, since you do put 3 bullets out pretty quickly with this thing. Another thing is that since you are a bit slower with your fire rate, especially after the end lag, this teaches you trigger discipline a little bit better than the L3. L3, it feels like you have to constantly be spamming that trigger, you know, to get the most effect out of the weapon. But since the H3 doesn't have that little, you know, quick firing, you have to actually plan that out, and it forces you to actually think about your next shot instead of just spamming and hoping something hits. This is why I think it feels consistent too, because it does teach that trigger discipline. Cooler obviously works very well with this weapon since it does paint pretty far and it is supposed to be a support weapon. You can do a lot of stuff getting coolers out here. Well, maybe not as good as the N-ZAP, it still does feel pretty nice, and I don't really complain about ever using this thing. It's just that there are better options that I don't really find myself using it. It is more difficult than shooters, I'm going to say that. I'm not, you know, going to make it sound like it's completely easy. I think it is easier than the L3, but it's not, you know, terribly easy to actually use. And that's why I just tend to gravitate more towards shooters, because those are the easiest weapons to use in the game since they're very consistent. But again, not a terrible weapon at all. Does what it does well, and that's about it. Next up, we have the Squeezer. 4-shot weapon if you hold the trigger down, and it's a 3-shot kill if you use your tap firing mode. Tap firing mode has similar range to Jet Squelcher and is very, very, very ink hungry. The hold fire rate is not terribly fast either, so it's really only for painting in a pinch and not necessarily for actually combating or, you know, trying to be the painter of the team, because it's not going to do that terribly well. It's just a nice little hybrid between the two. This is a mashing weapon for sure, similar to the brushes, so if you're not terribly great at mashing, it's not going to feel amazing. This is similar to the L3, and again, if you watch that through wins, I like to shut the game audio off when I'm warming up with this weapon, because it allows me to not focus so much on how many shots I'm getting out, but what shots I do have and where they're landing. I want that visual feedback instead of just the audio feedback of what's happening, because a lot of times we're waiting for the audio cues, or at least for me, I'm waiting for those audio cues to tell me I've hit something instead of looking for the visual cues. If you look for the visual cues, it's going to feel a lot more snappy instead of just waiting for those audio cues that might never come. Because if you're focusing on looking, you'll actually see when you hit the target and how far maybe you miss the target if you do miss them, instead of just, you know, waiting to listen and hear and then not seeing actually where you actually hit the target, and then sometimes just locking your aim just a little bit too far off of your enemy. This weapon is great, you know, main weapon wise, it's very, very, very strong. And then you get the Splash Ball and Trizooka. Splash Ball works very well with it. It's a long-range weapon, so that Splash Ball helps you get even further into kind of mid or something like that and poke even closer to the back lines. It also protects you whenever you aren't really confident about your aim or something like that, and also helps you paint a little bit more. That's something like 52 likes to do, which I didn't mention before, where if you wall up closer to the enemy territory, you can paint a little bit better. Again, that's a really good thing and very consistent with a lot of the wall weapons that aren't too short ranged, where you can actually paint pretty far into the enemy base and then, you know, go back in with another wall where you actually painted before and then kind of keep pushing people back that way. The special you're painting for this time is the Trizooka, and that's an amazing special weapon to paint for. Everything I said about it on Splattershot applies here. The fire rate whenever you, I believe, are maxing it out is about the same as a Splattershot Pro, as long as your hands aren't too tired or something like that. So having that along with just this kit really works well with it. It's very aggressive, and if you see people using it in higher levels, it's going to be very aggressive. That is what it is made for, and the Zuka just supplements that so well. This lets you pick off any E-leaders or any chargers that you're just struggling maybe to get too close to, especially behind walls, because this thing is very weird at actually hitting behind walls, and it does that pretty well. Sometimes if you are the charger or something, sitting behind a wall thinking, oh, I'm safe, I don't have to worry about that Zuka, it'll clip right over the top of you and take you out without you even realizing what happened. Since there is no real startup lag on the Zuka, it feels a little very oppressive. I say a little oppressive. It feels very, very, very oppressive. I'm kind of tripping over my words here. But yeah, it just really works with this weapon well. I think the kit is amazing, and while it might not necessarily want wall, it might have a better special like Splat Bomb or anything like that. I believe the second kit actually got Splat Bomb. You know, I think wall works well with it, at least in my opinion. It's similar to the 96 scale deco, where it just kind of does help push your painting power forward. Now that we're done with the shooters, we're going to move on to the Carbon Roller. Wow, this thing is hardly ever used at all. Carbon Roller itself is pretty good. It's a very, very, very fast weapon. Similar to the Splash-o-matic though, you have to be close to actually be getting kills with this thing safely. Vertical flick helps you a lot if you are trying to go for kills, but then you have to aim it. If you get used to the vertical flicks, it feels pretty good. I am personally a fan of the Carbon Rollers. I don't use them very often, but when I do use them, they feel powerful. They feel very oppressive if you can get in. If you can't get in, they feel completely worthless and not like they can do anything at all. So what does this weapon get to kind of counteract that playstyle? Auto bombs. That's okay, I guess. No instant activating paint like the burst bomb has on the second kit. It's not terribly kill heavy either, as it does take a while to explode if it does find someone, and that tracking might seem nice to distract someone, but if they just back away from you, then they can focus on the auto bomb. It's not amazing for this weapon. Again, it would like something that could explode a little bit faster, and while it is cheap, which is good, you know, especially for a carbon that you might want to throw them out a couple of times, the second kit just outclasses it completely, having the burst bomb. Burst bomb allows for movement and stuff like that, and I don't want to go too much into that because I'll take care of that when we get to that weapon. But you could have done a lot better than auto bomb. You could have done a lot worse too. You could have given it a splash wall, which that's not that great. Zipcaster is also a thing that, you know, might think it would be good on this weapon, but it's not. A lot of times I just use the little zipping into people to try to do anything because the main weapon is so short ranged, and you might think, oh, well, that's why you have the zip. You'll zip into someone and kill them, right? No, you won't. If you zip close enough to someone and don't hit them, they might just kill you before you can even get close enough to actually swipe at them. And they're probably already running away from you because you are a Zipcaster. That's why I would like, you know, Zipcaster weapons are good with something like the, what's it called? The Squiffer. Squiffer has decently mid-range, which is pretty good. In fact, it's getting a little closer to longer range. So now you can safely zip to someone if you're not wanting to just kind of burst into them. You can now kind of attack them at range pretty safely or get up on vantage points that you wouldn't be able to if you were just normally playing the game. This is the thing for Splatoon Stamper, which allows you to actually, you know, charge swap from far away, or get in close and then use your close range charge swipes to do something else. The reason it's not as good on Carbon is because your main damage dealer, the vertical flicks, take a little bit too much time to come out, and you'd rather just spam the arm, which is fine. You know, the Zipcaster zip is okay, especially after they buffed it. It's very consistent as long as you're aiming correctly, which is fine. But the lacklusterness about this kit, comparing it to the second kit, which has Burst Bomb and Trizuka, it just is so outclassed. You don't ever really see anyone using this. And when I used it to, you know, get footage for this little video here, it didn't feel great. I could get a lot of kills with it, sure, but that's because my teammates were painting for me. And if you lose that, you're gonna struggle a lot. Next up is the Splat Roller, coming with Curling Bomb and Big Bubbler. We talked a little bit about this before, but the main weapon's pretty nice. Further range than the Carbon Roller, which means you're much more threatening, especially against the shorter range shooters, and you're Vertical flick is longer, but it does take longer to come out too. So, you know, it's a bit more something you have to learn how to, you know, track with, because if you're not tracking well with it, at the very least, carbon comes out pretty quick. This one you'll have to track for a lot longer, and it also leaves you out in the open for a little bit more. It does get Curling Bomb to move around though, which is pretty nice, since it's not the best at painting and it does want a lot of paint to move around, especially if you're playing for Ninja Squid. The Curling Bomb does help you out there, as long as you're not immediately swimming in where it goes and just maybe trying to play the long game of getting some paint over in the enemy base before you move in. You know, it's pretty nice, and this thing does work well at rushing, as long as you don't reveal your cards too early and get close enough to people to at the very least one-shot them, which isn't terribly too close to you. You can actually have a little bit of safe distance with it. Bubbler, like I said before, works really well with this weapon. You can swat anyone trying to come inside, and then you can also walk to the edge of it and do some vertical flicks or something like that. Of course, you'll get the refill, so you can also throw your Curling Bomb, which is also really nice too if you need to make a quick escape and you use it for defense. Or you can use it for offense and plant yourself up in their base, trying to maybe shark outside of it if they are thinking you're inside the bubble, or just trying to hold a point and try to be aggressive that way. Not a bad weapon at all. I like using it. I don't know. It's a bit of a trade-off with the second kit. I personally like it a little more than the second kit, just because it kind of does what it wants to do better, and its movement is better than the second kit, because the second kit gets beacons, which don't really help it get in very much. But yeah, again, a good weapon, nothing really terrible about it, and maybe not the best thing in the game, but we don't really need the best thing all the time, or then nothing would really be terribly special or shine on its own. All right, next up we have the Dynamo Roller. This is another weapon I really like. Sprinkler and Cooler means it is built for support. Sprinkler, again, not the best. It is incredibly expensive, and most of the time I either use it for a meat shield or as a little mini burst bomb. And 70% for that is not great, especially with a weapon like this, which uses a lot of its ink tank to do literally anything. It's incredibly slow, but very, very, very oppressive to anything that has shorter range than a midline. So splatter shots, N-ZAPs, you know, anything shorter than that or even that is going to have a tough time as long as this Dynamo is playing safely and kiting them. It got a buff somewhat recently, you know, I'm saying recently, but it got a buff sometime during Splatoon 3 that made its damage a lot more consistent, meaning that now if you take any damage from a Dynamo, you're most likely getting killed in the next tap by it if it does tap you. Those 3 shots are very rare to even see anymore, and a lot of times you might just outright get killed by a 1 shot. Vertical flicks are the worst part of this weapon as they're incredibly slow. Yes, you can use them to slosh over ledges and stuff like that, thinking of something like brine water if you want to play it safe, but you find yourself just thinking, man, if I could just jump in from a super jump and, you know, swat horizontally, that would be so much better than having to wait for that massive thing to just miss. Because again, like I said before, the longer you have to track with something, the more difficult it's going to be to use it. And that's not even talking about having to lead the shot, since it is fairly slow too. At maximum range, I believe it deals about 40 damage, which is not good for something that takes this long to throw out and also is very ink hungry like that, because by the time you get your next one out, they might have already fully healed. So not another great thing either, but horizontal is so good, you know, it kind of justifies using the weapon itself. It might not be the best weapon in the world, but I'll always enjoy using it. I've already said my piece about Sprinkler, but Cooler works really well for this weapon too, since it paints pretty decently. Maybe not as good as something like the N-ZAP, but it does pretty well for what it can do, especially at that mid-range. It's a lot of burst painting, so it's good for something like zones contesting or anything like that. And since you are getting quite a decent amount of coolers if you're playing it right and staying alive, which a lot of the times you might end up doing because you're sometimes the longest range weapon on the team, depending on what mode you play, you'll be getting a lot of coolers to help your more aggressive teammates. And this thing can play aggressively, that's the thing. Cooler can help this thing move around a lot faster, meaning you can get yourself to a position where you can maybe safely just throw a horizontal out and then back away, or, you know, reposition to a spot where you can throw another one out and try to pin them. You can feel a little overwhelmed if you are constantly the only one alive, and I think that is the downside of this weapon, that it does struggle to do that, but it's not made to do that. It's made to be a support, and it does that really well. You'd rather have a different sub-weapon than a Sprinkler, obviously, but what you have here not terrible at all. I personally really enjoy using this weapon. Alright, second to last is the Flingza roller, coming with ink mine and missiles. I am not a mine guy. I hardly ever use these. I forget I have them. When I use them, they hardly ever go off unless I detonate them myself. And even if they do go off, they usually don't have much of an effect on the match. They work for Flingza. Flingza has pretty much the better Dynamo vertical flick, but its horizontal is not terribly great. It does work if you do need it to slay, especially if your teammates are not really slaying weapons. You know, you get in, because if they're not slaying, then they're probably painting. So you get in, you use your horizontal, you snap someone up, which is actually pretty easy with this weapon. When I used to use this weapon a lot, it actually happens quite a bit, you know, where you can actually get close enough to kill someone. Hitbox is a little weird on it though, since it isn't quite like the splat rollers. It's a bit shorter ranged on the kill range, and it is also weirdly shaped enough to where it can go over some people sometimes. But you're really here for the Flingza flick, where it's very, very, very good at painting, and it can threaten with damage a little bit, but you're painting with it. You're doing a lot of burst paint with that, and you're staying safe. You're making sure you can get those missiles so you can launch them, be annoying with those, force people off the objective or wherever the key point you're trying to take is. It's really, 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 really an annoying special, and that's kind of the whole point of it. You get your special quickly, you use it, wait for that cooldown, paint again. It's also nice that you can, you know, pressure some less ranged opponents. So if you are with a teammate where they're kind of taking that aggro, you can be annoying and throw some chip damage at them while also painting over where they're trying to go. Again, I'm not terribly great at this game, but I can see where this thing can be really good and annoying. While there are better weapons than it, I do actually enjoy this when I do pick it up from time to time. Again, like some of these, I just don't always pick it up because there are some better options that I enjoy using. But if you are looking for a missile weapon, I don't think you can really go wrong with this. The only downside, I think, is the mines, which don't really work well with it terribly. You are playing more defensively, so they can work in spots. But, you know, I've said this plenty of times before. You'd rather have something like a lethal bomb or anything like that. And that would also, you know, help you poke further ranged enemies that you can't really reach with your vertical. Either way, again, really good weapon. Next up, and finally, we have the Squiffer, the first of the Chargers. This one comes with point sensor and bubbler. I talked a little bit about the new Squiffer earlier, but the regular Squiffer is interesting, to say the least. Has a fast charge time, and you can keep your charge speed even while jumping, which is pretty nice as well. Very, very, very high skill floor weapon. If you're not good at it, you're not going to be doing much with it other than throwing point sensors and maybe using your bubbler. But if you are good with the main weapon, you are a force to be reckoned with. While the kit doesn't help it out terribly much, the main weapon itself is incredibly scary if you know what you're doing with it. It's mobile, it's deadly if you do play around it correctly, and it is just very, very, very good. But you have to get past that high skill floor. Point sensors do help it out finding people behind walls or anyone who's sharking. That's probably one of the worst things this weapon has to deal with is close-up killers that can actually, you know, get around your shots or something like that. And especially if you're out of paint, which is where most sharkers will be, it's good for finding those people out. And every time you play against the Squiffer, you're probably going to be marked for a lot of the match because that's what they do. Since their main weapon isn't terribly ink hungry and they're not constantly shooting things out if they don't have the chance to get a shot off, they're probably throwing these point sensors out a lot. And it does work for the weapon. I just, you know, think the auto bomb on the second kit is maybe a little better because it does a similar thing but can also be lethal. Finally, you have Big Bubbler. Kinda similar to Splat Roller where you can threaten inside of it, but if someone's gotten that close to you as you're a Squiffer, you're probably missing a shot and then you're probably going to die because of that. It does help you land shots, and especially if you have a teammate to kind of keep your little close range area safe, it can work pretty well. Again, Bubbler isn't completely worthless, but it's not terribly great either. It has its uses, like I've said before, but for this weapon, it's just okay. It's not amazing, it's not terrible, kind of a middle of the pack, and that's what this weapon is. Not amazing, not terrible, middle of the pack. There are better options, but it's very unique in its playstyle, and since you only get 2 kits for this weapon, I think it's fair to say that, you know, it's not terrible for that. Either way, there we go. There's the first 18 weapons covered. If you enjoyed this, please let me know. I don't know if anyone will enjoy this, but you know, I like doing this. I certainly find it fun to just kind of ramble for about an hour every now and then. And I'm glad I did only 18 weapons because this did take quite a bit to record. I'm not using a script or anything like that either. If you couldn't tell, you know, for how all over the place I am and how similar some things sounded, I'm not a script writer. You can probably tell from the intro too that it's just kind of abrupt. We're right into the fray. And obviously, I'm only one person, so I have my own thoughts and opinions on things. I know you guys would think differently, and please let me know what you think about these current weapons that I've talked about. I don't necessarily hate any weapon. I really dislike some. Sploosh Neo, Gootuber, either of the Gootubers I'm really not a big fan of, but I know some people like them. So yeah, just let me know what you guys think. I'm also not tier listing these. Obviously, you can tell I'm not tier listing them. I'm not good at that. I'd just like to give my opinion on it and then go on to the next one without ranking it. I think this one's better than that one. I'm not that person. I can't do that. I'm sorry. I would be so inconsistent. And there are people that do that really well, and they know their stuff, and they can put it there and there and there, and they know exactly what does better than this weapon and why it does that better. I'm not really that. I can just give my thoughts and opinions on what I've experienced in the game myself. Either way, again, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a comment below, and maybe even consider subscribing. Until next time, bye.